Welcome to another revision lecture in Business Management, Unit 4, Outcome 1B. We're going to look at the employment cycle today, and we are going to look at all parts of the employment cycle from those three phases: establishment, maintenance, and termination. Obviously, there's likely to be more questions on maintenance and establishment phase in terms of people's employment. And of course, the maintenance phase will take up the vast majority of anyone who works at an organisation for longer than a few years. It's the maintenance phase that is by far the vast majority of their time. And in that regard, it is very important. The other two phases are also important. Of course, the establishment phase, we want to make sure that we get the right people. The great thing about this area of study is that there's so many things we can connect back to when we can connect back to the how human resources is related to the overall business strategy and strategic objectives. Because if you recruit the right people, then you're likely to have, great, and you develop them in this section, then you're likely to have really good outcomes in terms of employee motivation, leading to low levels of staff turnover, high productivity, more innovation, better outcomes in market share, profit, lower costs, all those sorts of things. All right, let's move into each of the steps. So the human resource planning step is related and related to business strategy. Of course, here I like to look at wastage. All right, it's all about having the right number of employees in the right jobs to carry out your business objectives. If you have not enough employees, then you'll all be running around like headless chooks. There'll be a lot of stress, and you won't achieve your objectives. And you'll probably have high staff turnover and high stress in your staff. If you have too many human resources or too many employees, and you've all seen them at a restaurant when it's not busy, they stand around and do nothing, and that's wastage. So you have to have the right number of employees to stretch them and give them locks, goal-setting theories and all that sort of stuff. And you have to stretch them to achieve your objectives, but not stretch them so much that they can't do the job or that the objectives are just too difficult. So what is HR planning? HR planning, never use the term HR planning without saying forecasting. So HR planning is forecasting your future employment needs. There it is there. So how do you go about HR planning? Well, think about it as a school. You think about who's retiring, who's going on service leave, who's leaving for another job, and you work out what subjects and how many kids have chosen which subjects, and then you've got a plan. You've got the basis of a plan to fit people into those subjects in order to teach them, at 20 kids on average a subject or a class. Of course, once you do your HR planning, that will lead you to other aspects of the employment cycle, such as recruitment and selection. So once we know that we've got 5 people retiring, we have to replace those people for classes, then we can go about doing our recruitment and selection. Okay, so that is HR planning. In relation to planning, identify and explain a practice or process from the maintenance phase of the employment cycle that may assist in improving employee performance. I'm not sure why that's there actually, so we might just move on. That question might come back to us a little bit later on. We'll do that when we do the maintenance phase. Beg your pardon. All right, the establishment, within the establishment phase, you've got your job analysis and job design. You must be able to define both of these concepts. Within the job analysis, please make note, you have 2 aspects. Your job description. Your job description is the tasks, and your job specification, which is the prerequisites or requirements, even skills, in terms of doing the job. These 2 things are usually written out and used to form a job advertisement, which then attracts people to, through the recruitment section of this establishment phase. So recruitment and selection is clearly related to the job analysis, because job analysis means that, okay, we know what we're looking for and we know the type of person we're looking for. And job descriptions can change over time. Okay. They also relate to performance management, because when doing performance management, we need to have a look at the job description. And in that regard, we look at the job description and say, right, now these are the roles or tasks that you have to carry out as part of your job. and we look at how you've been performing in each of those tasks or those key areas. And that leads us to make judgments about performance management. Job design is a slightly different beast. Job design talks about how a person's job can change due to the person's characteristics themselves, their personal characteristics, or any passions that they have or bring to the job. A job can be redesigned around someone's particular skills and passions, and in that we can do job design. I actually think job design or job redesign comes in more once someone has proved themselves in an organisation, so should possibly be part of the maintenance phase. But what we might want to do is, if we meet someone who's applied for a job and they're not perfect for that role, we can actually redesign the role to suit the person. And a lot of organisations will do that to keep and attract really high quality people. Okay, I've made a mess of that page. All right, so in the establishment phase then comes recruitment and selection. So what is recruitment? This is the attraction of people. Selection is in the process once you start going through the resumes and the job applications of people when you externally recruit. Your parents or anyone else would just say that recruitment covers the whole thing. But in the study design, it's very clear. There's a difference between recruitment and selection. So you need to be able to distinguish between these two things. Recruitment is the attraction of people for a job vacancy. The selection process is once you have those applicants, the process of selecting the perfect or the best applicant for the job. All right, you need to distinguish between internal and external recruitment, advantages and disadvantages of both. You need to know about different methods of recruitment, such as just going, why would people go to the paper to attract a passive job seeker, or would you just do it all online? There are different ways in which you can attract candidates. And obviously, as I said before, you need to distinguish between recruitment and selection. You must know at least 4 steps in the selection process and link successful selection with the achievement of overall objectives. So, particularly things like interview, there's things like psychometric testing, there's things like background checks with past employers or reference checking, things like that. There may be a group interview stage where people can show their skills. Okay, so you must know at least 4 steps that are quite distinguished from each other. If we go to 2010, we go to Allen's Advertising Agency, which was, I think, discussed with Locke's theory of motivation in the last video. And we've seen this case study before, how 3 of the 6 graduates have resigned due to low job satisfaction. Discuss the selection process that could be used to ensure that new staff meet the needs of the organisation. Okay, so here I'd suggest that you need either 5 steps that you talk about with 1 mark each, or you talk about 3 steps in much more detail. So the choice is yours, and I don't think it matters in this one, but you may just want to practice doing this question with 5 steps. Try and take about 4 lines per step. Make them distinctly different. And in this case, if you are doing 5 steps, your first step could be something as simple as sorting through the resumes and the applications and seeing which ones do and don't meet the job specification. And an examiner would love that because it links to other parts of the course and it shows you clearly know what you're talking about. All right, so not too difficult, mostly a theory type question. Obviously it relates to this job, but it's mostly a theory type question. All right, moving back to the establishment phase, and the last little red dot point within establishment is employment arrangements and remuneration. Okay, remuneration means your total employment package. So once you've done your selection and you're willing to appoint someone, you then have to work out and possibly negotiate remuneration. What sort of things would you give them? And there's obviously different things, and the higher up your position, the more likely you are to have a package that includes things like a bonus share arrangement or a share scheme, a car, even discounts and things like that. Employment arrangements refer predominantly to whether you are full-time, part-time, casual or contract, this aspect, but also as to which part of the employee relations, such as a collective agreement or individual contract, or whether you're on an award. And as you know, we'll cover that a bit more when we do employee relations. So employment arrangements are probably more to do with the sort of hours and the pay, the pay comes under remuneration, but the hours and whether you're covered by full-time, part-time, casual or contract. All right, so with remuneration, you need to know there's obviously financial and non-financial benefits. Is there a performance-based aspect to the remuneration? That is, do you have a bonus linked? Do you have to hit certain key targets in terms of getting your whole remuneration package? So some people in sales, for example, might have a 30% at-risk component. That means that 30% of their salaries is at risk. If they don't hit all their targets, they might not get all that 30%. Okay, let's move into the maintenance phase and we look at induction. All right, what's an induction? It's the introduction of someone to the organisation. Explain why it's important in terms of staff retention, productivity and corporate culture. And of course, if you've just employed someone, their first impression is so important. And if people get a really bad impression first off, it could lead to the worst outcome, which is them leaving very quickly. At worst, it'll take them not so bad as that, but still bad is that it might take them a long while to settle and become a productive member of staff. A good induction is really important in terms of assimilating someone into the culture and making sure they fit in and are a productive member of staff very quickly. Training and development is obviously a larger part of the maintenance phase. This is ongoing for the life of someone's tenure at a job. And you must be able to distinguish between training and development. So what is training? Training is about upping someone's skills in order to do the job better or more productively. Development is about creating greater, softer skills in an individual to develop them or prepare them for more senior roles within the organisation. So with development, we're looking at promotion. So someone is being developed to take on more senior roles, usually a promotion. Now, these are really important to employees because employees want to do their job well, therefore they want to be trained. Employees want to move up in the future, they want to have more responsibility, and we go back to Hertzberg's motivation theory, therefore they want to be developed. So both these things are vital. They're clearly different, but they come under the one dot point. And they are obviously all related to these things. When you have training and development, and it's done in the right way, and people see it links to their jobs and their careers, they are appreciative, and therefore you should have less turnover, you should have increased productivity, and all these things that are written here. Okay. And you can should be able to link those to the bigger strategic objectives of reduced costs, increased market share, and that sort of thing. All right. So in 2011, in the foyer of the Office of Southern Industries hangs a sign that states employees are our most important resource. If we look after our staff, everything else will take care of itself. Okay. So the Human Resource Manager of Southern Industries has identified a problem with staff in the maintenance phase of the employment cycle, and he believes that staff performance can be improved by implementing more induction and training and development. Explain both induction and training and development. Discuss how these practices will assist in the effective management of staff. Now, here's another discuss question that then has this word here, assist. So, in fact, you don't have to discuss the negatives. So, what you've got to do is you've got to explain what induction is. So, basically define it in an extended way, and then explain or define training and development and how they, I would also put in the whole lot to how training is different to development. So, explain them separately, in other words. Then, you need to discuss how these practices will assist in the effective management of staff. So I would provide two benefits of induction and then two benefits of training and development in terms of the effective management of staff. And I think that's probably very easy for training and development because you can do one for training and one for development. Probably not that easy to do two for induction. But you should have a go at doing those two, 4 lines each. Just try and provide two benefits that are distinctly different of this implementing a better induction, more effective induction, as it's said in the question. All right, recognition and reward. Now, this was asked recently in an exam. You need to be able to distinguish between rewards that are intrinsic, extrinsic, and financial and non-financial. Okay, so the rewards that are intrinsic are just make people feel better about their work and what they're doing. Extrinsic rewards are, of course, something that has a monetary value. You obviously need to, again, link rewards and recognition to overall performance. People want to be recognised. I think the recognition part of this is so easy to relate then to Maslow and Hertzberg. People want to be recognised for the job they do. And that doesn't have to be financial. That can just be true recognition of people putting in a really good effort. Or it can be a small financial thing. Something like a dinner voucher for $100 is enough to say to people, we really recognise that you've worked hard on this project. Therefore, we believe that you should go out, have a nice dinner. It's on us. Perhaps $200 in this day and age. I'm being a bit tight there. All right. So recognition and reward. You need to understand these things. Going back to that 2010 exam example, you had the human resource manager at Allen's Advertising also considers using reward management. Discuss how reward management is linked to motivation in an organisation. In your answer, identify and explain the way that one financial and one non-financial reward could improve motivation. Now, this is one of those questions where you've just got to break the question down and work out where the 6 marks are allocated. Discuss how reward management is linked to motivation in an organisation. So what I would do is probably, and then in your answer, identify and explain the way one financial and non-financial could improve motivation. So in general, what you would do is discuss how the reward management is linked to motivation by actually using one of the theories of motivation. Why not? That's how you've learnt motivation, so you can lose, and I would use Hertzberg and talk about how reward management can increase the motivation for some of those, particularly the motivation factors in Hertzberg. Then you would quickly get into the way that one financial reward could improve that motivation. Now, the best thing to do here would be talking about a bonus, all right? Because you can link that to recognition, all right? So if you just set a pay rise, then, what we know about the motivation theories doesn't work here. But if you link to recognition, so the bonus is linked to recognition, people will feel better about themselves, and that will increase motivation. All right, the non-financial reward could be, it could be something like Employee of the Month. I'm not a big fan of that, but you could do something like promotion or increased scope of work or more interesting projects. So there's a number of things that you could go with, and you can use your imagination in here with the non-financial reward, as long as you link it back to increased motivation. Okay, let's move on. Maintenance phase performance management. I think this is one of the biggest aspects of human resources, and I'm not sure that Australian businesses do it that well. So performance management is about assessing the performance of someone looking back. It's also about talking about their future goals. So we can look at performance management, that is looking back, reflecting on performance, and we can look forward to say, what are your goals for the future and where do you see yourself in the future, i.e. do we need to link performance management to development, all right? And you can really link this to training and development. So if someone hasn't performed a job well, perhaps they need training in a certain aspect. Looking forward, how can we develop this person so that they stay at the organisation and become an even better and more productive member of staff? So you need to know that the performance appraisal is obviously the main formal method of managing performance. There are also informal things that happen every day where we can give feedback on performance. And Locke's theory of motivation explains that in part, that the feedback should be constant. Obviously, you need to know how performance appraisal works every 6 months or every 12 months, and how that links in and then links into these key areas. It is so important for the performance management process to be done properly and honestly. And this is where ethics come into this as well. So a poor performance appraisal, even if it's a positive one, if it's conducted poorly, will be demotivating for staff. So this is one area of the employment cycle that I think people or organisations avoid because they're worried about this demotivating factor. But if it's done well, it can be a hugely motivating tool, and it can set people on a path to a career that they really want, and it can help crystallise where organisations should be putting some of their key human resources. Down the bottom here, we've got to talk about the link between performance management and training. So performance management will give us an idea, if we conduct a performance appraisal properly, about where people will need to be developed and trained, as I said at the outset. A really key part of the maintenance phase. All right, obviously I put that question about maintenance in the wrong section. The question was, identify and explain a practice or process from the maintenance phase of the employment cycle that can assist in improving employee performance at Wellham Consulting. That was in 2014. And there you have something where you can just talk about any aspect of the maintenance phase. In that regard, you probably want to be talking about training development or performance appraisal, or performance management rather, because it gives you the most to talk about. All right, now let's move on to the termination phase. We've probably gone on a bit long. So within the termination phase, you need to know that there are basically two types of termination. We can group them into voluntary and involuntary. The voluntary ones are resignations, retirements, or you might have the opportunity to take a voluntary redundancy. Please note that redundancy can also be an involuntary form of termination. So those people who are losing their jobs in the car industry are being made redundant. That is an involuntary form of termination. Of course, there is also, in the involuntary box, there is also dismissals. You can have an instant dismissal for a serious breach of policy, or you can have warnings over a period of time given to a staff member for less serious breaches, but breaches nonetheless. The important part of this dot point, I think, is this entitlement and transition issues. You need to be able to talk about certain transition issues that organisations can help employees, particularly those they're making redundant, they can help them with. So what firstly they need to do to be legal and ethical is provide redundancy payments that is commensurate with their tenure. That's the length of time they've been working. Then, over and above that, in ethical terms, they can provide outplacement services, which are just like services to help people try and transition to another job. That might be help in resume writing or in interview workshops, things like that. So outplacement services are very important. Financial planning services are also important. Financial planning services can provide those people who may be close to retirement age with some knowledge and information about how they can possibly make their redundancy payment help them last or survive into their retirement. So if they want to transition slowly into retirement, it's about making sure that they've got enough money to be financially stable through retirement. And financial planning services can be one of those services. And you can discuss those in two distinctly different ways. The other thing that organisations can do in regards to entitlement is give people time. Something the car industry's done very well is they've given their employees years, in some cases, notice of when their job will finish. Now, that's not the same for all industries, unfortunately, and a lot of people get made redundant and leave straight away. And that's very harsh. Those people don't have time to adjust. They don't have time to try and transition or do some training or even some further education to transition to another career. So I remember that down in Geelong there were announcements of redundancies, one for Ford, which were going to occur over a 2 to 3 year period, and then I think the other ones were at Target. I'm not 100% sure. This was a year or two ago, and those people were made to leave immediately. And they were very distressed about that. Whereas at least the Ford employees have time to try and transition, whether they want to work in a small business or train up for something else. This is a big part, and it's closely linked to ethics and social responsibility in the employment cycle. Okay, so in 2013, what they did was they talked about the this was the 10-mark question. So the movement of staff into, through and out of an organisation, that is the employment cycle, is generally managed by the HR manager. With reference to management practices and processes that are associated with each phase of the employment cycle, discuss how the management role of planning could be used in the establishment phase, how performance indicators could be used in the maintenance phase, how the choice of management style could impact on the termination phase. Wow. So there's a bit in this, but what are we really looking at? So we're probably looking at 4 marks there, and there could be either 3 or 4 there, and either 3 or 4 there. And I think that adds up to our 10. Oh, no, it doesn't. You're a doofus. So you're probably looking at 3, 4, 3. So that's your 10 there. Beg your pardon. All right. Performance indicators, they've got more than one. They're usually worth 2 marks each. So performance indicators in the maintenance phase. Now you're clearly looking at probably staff turnover, and you can link that to, training and development. You can link it to poor inductions. You can link it to the lack of rewards. Any part of the maintenance phase could be linked to staff turnover. Within this, you're also looking at possibly productivity growth. So you want to choose them carefully. I myself would talk about the rate of productivity growth in relation to training and development. I would talk about staff turnover in relation to poor performance management. How the management role of planning could be used in the establishment phase. Okay, now remember that planning is basically in HR is the forecasting and how you need to plan your objectives. So you've got to plan your objectives. What are your objectives? And then you've got to talk about how that relates back to HR planning within the establishment phase, and probably how that leads you to do recruitment and selection. All right. Now, the choice of management style and how the choice of management style could impact on the termination phase. This is really interesting because, of course, when you think of management styles, you immediately think of, doing consultative or participative. Participative just would not work here, whereas consultative may work and persuasive may work. So you could talk about persuasive in terms of voluntary redundancies and how organisations may try and promote voluntary redundancies. So it's a really interesting question. You really need to think about this type of question and how you're going to break down your answer. Okay, running out of time. Past exam questions 2012. Describe and justify one management practice or process from each of the 3 phases of the employment cycle that could apply to Webster's as it changes its focus to compete on quality. Okay, if it's competing on quality, and you will have read or you will read soon the Webster's chocolate case study, which is a little long to put in the PowerPoint, you've basically got, right, what can I do from the establishment phase? Okay, well, in this case study, what they're looking at is getting a new piece of equipment out from overseas. So possibly they need to do a job analysis on the person who's going to run the machinery. Or, along the same theme, you could talk about recruitment and selection for that particular chocolatier. So perhaps we need to recruit people who've got experience at making higher quality chocolates. All right. So they've changed their focus to compete on quality. You don't even need the case study for that. So you've got to think about how one aspect of each of the phases of the employment cycle. All right. Then you've got to go to, that's establishment done. Now you've got to go to the maintenance phase. So within the maintenance phase, okay, if we're going to have an increase in quality, we're going to have training and development, surely. All right. And that would be the most obvious place to go. So we'll talk about training and development in the maintenance phase. Termination, not so easy, but possibly we could talk about voluntary redundancies. Who for? Well, for those people who just aren't embracing the new push towards a higher quality product, who that might be the way to go. Or perhaps the influx of machinery may cause us to have redundancies. And we can come back to this machinery and we can talk about redundancies. All right. So I think this is a really good question because it says you've got to know the whole employment cycle and then, apply it to a case study. And you really do have to do a really good application here. Understand what it is that's going on at Webster's to be able to provide your